Quentin Tarantino. Thank you for coming.
Well, you know, it's just writing. I mean, I consider novelists real writers. Now, I actually consider screenwriters real writers too. And I was listening to a podcast,
Table Reads, with Sean McBee and Trevor Thompson,
where they were kind of going through a bunch of my screenplays, and I'd actually read the screenplay, so they were actually quoting things from the scripts that didn't make the movie. Experience the worst Hollywood has to offer with readings of the scripts you never wanted. Table Reads. Every Tuesday, right here on the Rogue Intel Podcast Network, or visit TableReadsPodcast.com.
Quentin Tarantino does not endorse this message.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen out there in internet land, and welcome to another awesome episode of the Powerful Nerdcast. I am Corey, and joined with me, as always, is my good friend Christian.
Hey, internet. Well, I want to say that this is an unusual Powerful Nerdcast. Usually, Corey and I pick like 3 to 5 topics on the internet and just discuss them, in pop culture land. But we have spent the last year working on a documentary in our media production company outside of YouTube and everything else we do, working on an awesome documentary called The After Hours Club with a gentleman called Morgan St. Knight. And he is here with us today, and we are excited to tell you guys about this documentary because it is about to go live. Probably by the time you listen to this, it will be live. So there's going to be links in the video and the podcast so you can check it all out. And Morgan, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, guys. And I just want to say it's been a great honor and pleasure working with you throughout this past year on this documentary.
Yeah, man, it has been a ton of fun. We have traveled all over the United States. We have produced 6 one-hour episodes. Not many people can say they've made essentially a television show season, and we have. Isn't that correct, Corey?
In such a short amount of time as well. And to
8
see
months?
the things that we saw, I mean, I've barely been like outside of Georgia before, so this was a really big deal for me, but I also wasn't prepared for how much it was actually going to change my perspective on the actual premise of this documentary, which, Morgan, I'm going to send it right back to you. Tell us a little bit, what is the After Hours Club? What is the premise of the show, and what are you hoping to present to the audience?
Okay, well, what we're doing on the show is we're taking an in-depth look at all aspects of death in America. And by death, I mean everything from the funeral industry, embalming, cemeteries, and people who work in funeral homes, to crime and death. We're looking at, in one episode, we do look at sexual tie-ins to death, but we also delve into topics like hospice care. We spend an entire episode on hospice care, and there are a lot of myths and misconceptions that we blow open about what hospice really is in America and what it can be if it's done properly. We take some cultural tie-ins too, like we take an in-depth look at vampires, and we also to highlight some fun things, like we went to the Museum of Death in both New Orleans and Los Angeles, and we went to a cute little shop called Obscura, and it's based in New York City, and it was actually the subject of a television show called Oddities.
Yeah, that one was really cool because sometimes, you go places and these people aren't used to like being on camera or don't really know how to present what they do in a quick 5-minute soundbite. But these people, since they had a television show, they were like, oh, that's all the equipment you brought? They were used to seeing full-blown television studios. They were saying how everyone was putting special films over the windows so they wouldn't blow out. And they were so used to production. They were like a breeze to work with, and also really good on camera. So that was a whole different things. Let's actually talk about that shop for a while, because that shop, what's it called? Obscura.
It's called Obscura Antiques and Oddities.
Antiques and Oddities. They essentially sell... I don't know how to describe it. They sell
antiques and oddities.
But what is an oddity? How would you describe an oddity, Corey?
I don't know. They had so much strange stuff in there. They had they had human remains. They had dummies, ventriloquist dummies, which were really creepy.
But from the 20s.
They had a 2-headed cow. One that had been stuffed. It was just all types of weird curios and things. The best way to equate Obscura for me personally, I got kind of this Ripley's Believe It or Not vibe from the entire place. If you've ever been to one of those museums before, it just has sort of that, like, you know, it's not all macabre, but there are elements to it that are a little strange or odd, or at least to, you know,
I would like take it back to like a 1920s freak show. Is kind of
a little bit, yeah,
but without like the humans in it, without the bearded lady and the strong man and
one
everything.
of us. Sorry, I had to.
Yeah,
I actually don't know what that reference is from, Corey. I'm so sorry. Is that from Bubble Boy?
No, this is a subject for a whole nother podcast altogether. It's from an old movie called like Freaks, I believe, or Freak Show or something around those lines. But getting back to Obscura, Morgan, why did you want to take us to this place? Why did this fit in this documentary?
Well, one reason is because I'm a huge fan of the show they did for Discovery and the Science Channel, which was called Oddities, as part of their title. And this place actually does deal in, not exclusively, obviously, but it does sell human remains. And people will go into a place like this. It's like you're going to a knick-knack shop to buy something for the coffee table. Well, this is a really out-of-the-way knick-knack shop. And when you think about, do I really want to buy a preserved human hand and put it on my coffee table? In my case, the answer is yes. I'm not sure what my 2 cats would do with it or where it would end up, but
under the fridge.
Yeah, probably under the fridge, along with 50 stuffed mice and God only knows what else.
Oh man!
But this was a good store because I think it just kind of shows how people can, not in a salacious way, but how you can profit off of death. How even human remains can be sold, and it's legally done. They abide by very strict guidelines, but it's done legally.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. Talking about one of the other cool shops we went to, the Museum of Death. Talk about profiting from death. You essentially have these 2 museums on either side of the United States. Are there 2 or 3? They're building a third.
They're building a third. They've got one in New Orleans, one in Los Angeles, and the third's going to be in Seattle.
Yeah, talk about profiting from death. These are previous art dealers who have got their hands on serial killer memorabilia, mass death events throughout the United States. They had some like weird footage of the JFK assassination that they had accumulated with a big thing that shows where JFK was shot and all the kind of conspiracy theory around it, kind of just the lore around the Kennedy assassination. They had old autopsy videos playing. They were essentially, and I don't mean it in a negative way, but profiting off this death exhibit, which they had accumulated. Right. And it was like really intense. Like I was like, oh, let's walk in. Oh, there's a gift shop. And there's a picture of a guy who's dead after being run over by a semi. Okay, right. I'm out of here.
Yeah, I mean, it does get a little gruesome. They had shrunken heads, actual shrunken heads, and clothing that people were wearing when they were executed. So it's a little macabre, but what it does do is it helps people get a little bit comfortable with death. I think, in a way, kind of playing footsie with death. So if you go in there and you look at it and you maybe get a little more familiar with what is involved in death and dying, which is a big part of why we did this documentary, because a lot of people don't know a lot about what goes on with death and dying in the United States. Like, after you die, what happens to your body? And people think they know, but they don't really know what goes on during an embalming, for example.
Yeah, the whole embalming thing was really eye-opening for me. Like, I'll tell you what my thoughts were on embalming before. Not that I even really had an opinion, but it was you die, and then they clean your body, and I guess they preserve you somehow. I knew that happened. I didn't know how it happened. And then you look really good because they put makeup and cut your hair and your fingernails, and they clean you all up, and then your family looks at you, and then you go in the hole. But there is a lot going on with embalming.
There definitely is.
They essentially take a giant needle that's like half an inch thick that has a vacuum suction attached to it and just suck out your guts by sticking you a lot with it.
Yep. And they basically they scramble your insides.
They do, and they suck it down the drain, and your internal organs basically are shredded, but most of them end up in the sewer. I mean, I hate to be very blunt, but that is what happens.
They essentially just make you a hollow shell, and then they pump a bunch of liquid into your veins, and then you're preserved for a week or 2. and then without any decay. Obviously, a normal human body would sit there fine for like 4 days and then start to decay, but like an embalmed body will go like 2 weeks and some change.
Yeah.
So it's...
And I'm glad you brought that up, that the body can sit there for 3 or 4 days without decaying, because
as long
actually,
as the temperature's not too hot.
Right. As long as, it's one thing to do it and say,
things you learn, the more you know.
In Ohio in the fall as opposed to Arizona in the summer, but we actually interviewed people about home funerals, and that is a trend that's growing in the United States, where people don't take the loved one to a funeral home after they've passed. They actually care for them in their own home. And there's a viewing in the home. There are some problems, obviously, because various states have different regulations about transporting a dead body. So how do you get it from your home
Got to get this body upstate.
Upstate to wherever you're going to dispose of the body? And by dispose, I mean hopefully properly bury it.
Well, let's paint a picture for people. Back, let's go to the 1800s, right? Back then, people were hunting more. They were gathering their own resources more. There wasn't a network for funeral homes back then. So essentially, you would clean the body at your house if someone you knew or your family member died, and you would get them ready for death, and then you would probably dig the hole along with someone that works at a cemetery, and then you would put them in it. It was all you, you and your family did it. And that sounds extremely foreign nowadays.
Yeah.
Extremely foreign.
But that really wasn't even that long ago.
That was
when you really think about
150 years ago, when people rode horses to get around, which doesn't sound that long ago. It's like 1.5 grandmas. That's how I always explain time. 1.5 grandma, lifetime, 1.5 lifetimes, ago. It wasn't even that long ago.
No.
So, the funeral home industry that we learned about getting away from embalming and going towards funeral homes, a lot of people don't like funeral homes because they think they're profit centers where they prey on people. And absolutely, people have done exposés on, the preying upon people who are emotionally damaged. They come in. They're like, oh, you want the basic model for your family member. I guess you don't love grandma, and they upsell them on a high-end cabinet for their loved one. Coffin, I mean, not cabinet.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, but you could use it as a cabinet prior to the person's death, I suppose.
You put some handles on it, some good hardware.
Typically, basically what you're saying is like a lot of people somewhat view these funeral industries as, say, a lawyer who's chasing after an ambulance. They're looking for that easy sell.
Yeah.
And, and while there are people who do that, it's not necessarily the case. And we definitely saw that when we went to Louisiana and we went to Delgado College. And we got to spend time with this classroom. And we got to see all of these young students who were learning to become like funeral directors and embalmers and everything. And it's amazingly fascinating, to be perfectly honest. And that's what I think is the strongest point of this documentary is, while the subject matter itself may be considered taboo, it's something that I think people genuinely want to learn about and know about. I mean, inquiring minds want to know about this type of thing. It's just due to the actual subject matter, it's kind of hard to just talk about in the open, or if you're out in the middle of nowhere, your friends saying this stuff out loud. But,
right.
We've lived it for the last year, so for us it's kind of become a part of us. But we've also learned to truly respect it as well, and that's what this whole documentary is about as well. That and the fact that it's also a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I mean, we had some great times on this trip.
Yeah, we definitely did.
I mean, we went to New Orleans and got smashed. Can I say that?
Yes.
Yes. It was a celebration after work. We were not drunk while filming.
It was a celebration, bitches. The point is that we had a really good time on this trip, as well as made a really rock-solid documentary. That's the other thing I want to say as early as I can in this podcast with you guys. Like, this is no joke. 6 really good episodes of a documentary that covers subject matter that I don't see covered all that often or at all from our perspective. And that is hard to do with documentaries because there are so many of them. Anyone who even has a Netflix subscription can watch hours and hours of documentaries that are all really well done. And I think the one we've created with you, Morgan, is right up there in quality. And it's because we have done very little other than focus on this documentary, especially you being the writer and the executive producer and one of the talents in the documentary. You've really put the last year of your life into this on a very high level. And I think the whole product is going to show. And that's why we're so excited to make a whole podcast just about this, because we really want to make sure our audience can get over the hump of understanding this is a documentary about death, and that may weird you out, and it may be a little too real for you when we first explain it to you, but I promise if you give it a shot, you'll really learn a lot, and you might really enjoy the ride too.
And let's talk about like the origins of this project. Like, when did this idea conceptualize for you? Like, when did you know this is the type of series that I wanted to make?
Well, I've always kind of had a dark bent. You know, when I was a kid growing up, all the other kids were looking forward to the high school football game on Friday nights, or maybe going to see the Browns play on Sunday. I grew up in Cleveland, and I was the one who was getting excited about the midnight horror show. And that kind of carried throughout my entire adult life, and I'd always wanted to do something death-related. I worked in journalism for 25 years, but every time I brought up stories like this, they were kind of poo-pooed away. That was like, well, you know, our audience doesn't really want to hear about this, so, you know, it's interesting, but no thanks. And finally, late last year, I found myself in a position to be able to do a long-term project, and I wanted it to be something that had impact. I wanted it to be something that's relevant, and you can't get much more relevant than death, because death is going to come for us all. And I wanted it to be something which could be not just educational, but maybe even enlightening to the people who are going to see it. And I thought death would be great. I knew I couldn't do a film because when I started listing all the topics that I wanted to cover, it became clear you couldn't do that in 90 minutes, not even 2 hours. So I figured a series was the only way to go.
Yeah, I think it made sense when you originally told me, and especially with the rise of episodic content now being such a strong medium, I was like, yeah, like a 6-part or 5-part documentary series seems like right in line. You know, we'll take the first episode, we'll establish the premise, and then we'll just keep throwing in new topics within that idea that we built with the first episode. And we had a really good time. Do you mind if or do you want to read off the episode titles just so people can kind of understand what
Or maybe we just go by an episode-by-episode basis to sort of explain like what each one's going to be about.
Yeah, but not in too detailed. We want to leave some surprise there for you guys.
Exactly.
Because there are some really powerful, one, emotional moments, and two, I think, educational moments that I think we've made a strong breakthrough if you give these documentaries a good watch all the way through. So the first episode, into that good night, funerals, cemeteries, and embalming. I think we've sort of touched on this one in some ways because went to New Orleans.
Went twice.
We went to New Orleans twice. We drove all over Georgia. We watched someone do a fake embalming on a medical dummy, and I immediately realized I think I need to say this when we were making this. I was like, oh, this is gonna like test who I am as a human being. Like, this is going to force me to look at my morality or not morality, mortality. And do you feel that way, Corey? When you were
a little bit. I mean, I was intimidated by the subject matter of the documentary when we first started because I didn't quite know what to expect or what I was going to see or even hear. But I'm glad that I did it. I think it made me grow as a person, and it made me appreciate all aspects of death at this point. And that's what I really hope is going to be the takeaway for a lot of the people who actually watch this documentary, is that they're going to stop looking at it as something that's dark and something they need to shy away from, but something that we all have to deal with eventually in our lives. And no matter where you're from, no matter what your religion is, your beliefs, we're all going to have to face it. And that's what this moment was for me. It was like facing death, finally.
Yeah, and the other thing is everyone's like, oh, I'm not scared of death. Or I hear people not... When I introduce this topic, they tell me how they feel about death. That's one of the things I usually ask. And they're like, oh, yeah, I'm not worried. And I don't think they're not worried. They just have put in zero thought about it.
We are very separated from death in this society. You know, and a large part of that goes back to we don't take care of our dead anymore, but people don't really understand what it means to die. And I think we do cover this in one of the episodes too. I think there is a level of desensitization going on because we see so much death and violence in just about every media outlet: films, television, anime, books. You know, it's there, and we're so familiar with it that we don't understand it. It's like kind of when you become familiar with a person, really familiar with a person, and you start taking them for granted and not necessarily seeing all the complexities they have. I think that's what our relationship with death has become like in this country.
I think it's kind of like war, too. And I don't mean death is anything really like war, but I mean like you can play a war video game. You can go shoot a gun. You can go train with someone in militaristic ways. But until you go to war, you really don't know what war is about. you know? So you can talk about death, you can da-da-da-da, but until you can go see death in Game of Thrones, on video games, in any medium you like that's on television nowadays, or like anime like Corey and I enjoy. But until you really experience a family member dying or see death in real life, like, you do not understand what it's about. And I think that was one of the, and it's not a scary thing, it's just a real thing. And I think a lot of people haven't dealt with that, or they're like, oh yeah, it's not that big a deal. I guarantee it's because you haven't put much thought into it.
Right.
You know, or maybe you have truly come to peace with it, which is one of the other things. I felt like I saw a lot of people that actually had come to terms with what the eventuality of life is, you know? Mm-hmm. So...
yeah, that was definitely a common theme. A lot of the people we talked to, because of the fields they work in, you know, we pursued people who were intimately involved with death on a daily basis, not just people who had, you know, had one or two people die in their life. These are people who choose this as a profession by and large.
Yeah, so they're surrounded by it all the time, which takes us to episode 2. Mm-hmm. That darkly shining abyss, death in media. Did I say that title right?
Yeah, you did. Yeah. That darkly shining abyss.
What is that from? That you told me that was from something.
That is from. I don't want to know whether it's called the book. It's something called the Chaldean Oracles, and the entire line goes, "Stoop not down, therefore, unto that darkly shining abyss," and it's saying, don't go to those dark places because, you know, you will degrade yourself. And that's a large part of what we talk about in the first half of that episode is how we've become not only intimately involved with death and maybe desensitized to it, but we go into places where people are turned on by death. We go into death fetishes. Some are related to sexual activity, like autoerotic asphyxiation, but others are actually into people watching other people die, getting off on it somehow, at death fantasies, but also real-life death, because we found that on the internet.
Yeah, real-life death is not hard to find. Like, I didn't have actually as much to do with that segment. Corey didn't either, because Corey and I, we realized up front that, like, hey, man, we don't want to watch people die on the internet, because it's not super hard to find.
Yeah.
You know, like, you pulled up you did a little research and then came into the office one day and you're like, here's the websites I found.
Yeah, and I could tell. I was like, okay, I'm pushing the boundaries here, so.
So, yeah, you and the editor just worked one-on-one on that segment, which is pretty brutal, but we also, it doesn't show much. We made sure to cut out the stuff. It just drives the point home that it's not hard to find, which is the point of that segment. But also Dr. Deviant and his colleague that we met, they were interesting dudes.
Who is a professor.
Yes.
Professor at Idaho State University.
He gets paid to talk about whipping people, which is an insane job. I cannot believe that's a job.
Yeah, it is. Well, but he also, one of the reasons we brought him in is because he also has an interesting theory about what motivates serial killers.
That is true. Yeah, he did. Like it was, they like the challenge, or what was his sort of outlook on? Well,
he looks at it as they are pursuing
something to do on Sunday
as a yeah, exactly. Well, he's calling it deviant leisure, and his premise is that the same excitement that you or I might get from bowling or going out golfing or doing a competitive sports activity, for example, there are different levels of pleasure that we all get from recreational activities. And he's saying that serial killers get the same thing, except they're getting it from killing people, the same way someone else would go out and do competitive skiing, for example. The serial killers are getting the same adrenaline rush the killer's high from going out and murdering people. Yeah,
essentially, they enjoy the activity like it's a passionate hobby, essentially.
Yeah,
you know, and it's sort of dark, but it's interesting that there's people who their whole profession is to study the mindset of some of our darkest elements of society.
Yeah,
and that's why they were interesting to talk to. But I think one of the strongest people we met in the sense of being a character was definitely Joseph Scott Morgan. Right?
Yes, death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan.
Death Invader.
Who we got to spend a lot of time with this guy. We got to visit him a couple of times, and he's clearly
Who is he? Like, what is he? He's a death investigator. Like, what is some of his like background that we learned about Corey?
I mean, we do know that he's an author, he's a professor, but his previous career was as a death investigator, and I believe at the time he was the youngest in the country.
Mm-hmm. He was the youngest.
Became a death investigator.
Yeah, it's a specific field called medical legal death investigation, which is basically these are the people who come out to crime scenes. So he did that for a number of years. He worked for medical examiners' offices in New Orleans and in Atlanta, and then eventually, though, it got to him. It got to him very severely.
Yeah, he essentially suffered PTSD and got forcefully court-ordered, removed from the career, and his story has some high points and some low points, and is a roller coaster of a ride. And I'm glad we got to talk to him, so I hope you guys check out that interview in episode 2.
Yeah.
And that is some intense stuff. But also, he is a fun guy to hang out with.
He is.
Yeah,
Yes, he
like-
is.
He's like we got done with the interview. He's like, okay, I'm going home and gonna play some Call of Duty. See you guys later.
Yeah.
That was like our first
Yeah.
impression of him too.
Yeah,
Like,
he and-
oh, this guy's awesome.
Yeah, and he introduced us to some of the best barbecue in Alabama. I do
Yeah.
want to make one slight correction. When he left the medical examiner's office, he did so because he did have a breakdown and he was diagnosed with PTSD. Well, he never got to the point where he had to be court ordered. It was
Oh well,
just
I thought it was his like therapist or someone.
yeah, his
said,
therapist said that she would go and prevent him from going back if she had to, but he actually willingly didn't
never
go
reached
back.
those levels.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
he never reached those levels, but that's when it hit home to him that, what am I going to do? You
Yeah,
know,
because that was his whole identity.
Yeah.
that was it. He was the youngest.
The good thing is, though, that when he had to stop being a death investigator, though, he didn't have to abandon everything that he learned.
Right.
And he was able to actually take everything that he experienced and teach it to a new generation of people who want to be in the same exact field as him. And he's a fantastic teacher. That's another thing. Not
Yeah.
only can you just have a great conversation with this guy, he can command a classroom. Like, we were there just, we were catching some B-roll of the classroom, him interacting with everybody, and I was getting sucked into his lecture.
Yeah.
I thought it was genuinely very interesting. And then right after that, he's like, all right, boys, let's go get some barbecue. Like, he was just such a classic guy. Great
Yeah,
character,
he-
Classic Southerner.
Yeah, he's a good Southern dude, and also just a well-balanced human being, even
Yeah.
though he can go and tell you some of the darkest stories you've ever heard. And we have a few previews of his stories on our promos on the website, which is the afterhoursclub.tv.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
After Hours Club TV.
Oh,
and
After Hours Club
TV. Dot TV.
Dot
Yeah.
TV.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're gonna again, guys, put all the links on our YouTube video and on our Rogue Intel page and everything else. So definitely go check it out there.
Also, if you guys are interested about checking out Joseph Scott Morgan's book, it's called Blood Beneath My Feet, The Journey of a Southern Death Investigator. It's a really great read, but just be warned, it does have some very graphic imagery, not only in the text, but actually with some actual pictures that are in the book. So be prepared for that. And that goes for this documentary as well. There are going to be some instances where some of the imagery might be a little intense. We do give you warnings before that does happen, so just be prepared for that.
Yeah, it's the episode 2 is probably one of the heavier emotional rides. I feel like it would affect the most amount of people. Like if 100 people watched, I think they'd say episode 2 was one of the most impactful episodes.
Yeah.
We go and attack your senses in positive ways too, with a lot of good positive stories. One of the things now that we're wrapping up this project and switching into the promotional side of things, there's a lot of positivity in this thing, in this series. Like so many times when I'm trying to explain this, it's a documentary about death, and then everyone stops listening, and I'm like, no. There's a lot of positive here. There's a lot of ups and downs. This is a real journey. This is not a slog through negative Sadville. You know? Like there's good stuff in here, and that actually is my transition in episode 3, Angels Among Us, Hospice.
Yeah.
Which is a really powerful episode when we explore the hospice system. And where did we go for that one?
We went to Cleveland to an organization called Hospice of the Western Reserve, which operates a few facilities in the Cleveland area. My own father was treated in hospice through them. My mother as well, although she died before she could leave the hospital and actually get to one of their inpatient facilities. But that experience, which kind of also prompted me, the deaths of my parents, was one of the motivating factors because it happened within the space of a year between 2016 and early this year, in early January when my mom passed. Kind of spurred me to want to do this documentary. But the care that my dad got at Hospice of the Western Reserve was remarkable. And when I found out everything they do and how they treat their patients and what you can actually accomplish through hospice care in terms of improving quality of life for those whose lives are now measured in months rather than in years, it impressed me, and I thought, people should know about this. People should understand that hospice is not a place where you go to die.
Yeah, hospice to me was a wing in a hospital where people just sat and died.
Yeah.
You know, it felt like it was going to be a medical institution, and it was just going to be blank white halls with sad, sanitary, clean rooms that were all white and medical feeling. But Hospice of the Western Reserve was almost like a resort.
Yeah.
Like they made it very like a giant cabin in the woods kind of vibe. You know, it had a very warm, inviting, big windows, natural light everywhere, gardens to walk in. Everything was wheelchair accessible, so a family member could come and put their loved one in a wheelchair and walk them all over the grounds without assistance from medical staff there. You know, like they can be independent there. People leave there and go on to live a few more years. Like they are promoting healthy, happy living there.
Right. And it's usually, I mean, it's unusual for someone to live more than a few months after they've been given the terminal diagnosis. But what happens with this is that sometimes people will need the hospice care for a little bit, but as you mentioned, they can actually, that gives the body a chance to recuperate and to rest, and then they can actually leave the hospice facility and go back home. We did meet some people who that had actually happened to, which was great.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I remember there have been a few times in my life that I've had to go to the hospital for family members and other things. And I always remember when I was young, my dad told me, every time you go to the hospital, no matter how sad you are, no matter how sad it looks, you always be super positive to everyone that you're seeing in the hospital, because they need to think everything's great.
Right.
Because the better they think everything is, the better chance they have of getting better, because positivity can really help you. I mean, a good mindset can really help you. You know, if you're down and depressed and sleeping all day, it's not going to help your healing, you know? And so, but that's the thing that the Hospice of the Western Reserve does so well. They just keep a upbeat attitude there and a bright, happy, non-clinical feeling kind of thing. They even hide the oxygen machines behind pictures and stuff like that, because they don't even want you seeing that when you walk in. They want no medical apparatus around. Yeah. And on top of that, they're a nonprofit, which I don't even understand how that works, but I'm very impressed with their whole operation.
Yeah, that was the thing that got me. What about you, Corey, though? Because you had an interview with the pet therapist there.
I did.
Corey just sat around and pet dogs.
That's it's an easy life, guys. The thing about hospice is my knowledge of hospice care was basically zero when we went into this thing. I was just like, oh, that means a hospice. I guess that means someone who's close to dying is going to get a bed that's going to raise up slightly. That's like my whole knowledge of what a hospice was. But I was really taken aback when we actually went to these places and got to see, as Christian said, they're very much like a resort. They hide all the medical stuff. They really try to make you feel as calm and comfortable as humanly possible. And what really struck me the most is not so much that they also help the people who are under care, but they go out of their way to help the families as well. Right. Even after the person has passed, they will continuously try to help the family during the grieving process and be with them the entire time, and that's really commendable. And I'm actually willing to say at this point, of the episodes that we do have complete, the hospice episode is my favorite episode. I think it's handled so well. It's got great subject matter. It's incredibly educational, especially for those who are looking for this type of care. And the ending of the episode, which I don't want to give away or anything, I think is one of the most powerful things that we've ever filmed or even created. Yeah. And just, I loved every second of being a part of that project. And I was really very kind of intimidated by doing that episode, because this was the one that, like, we just got done doing all these travels and partying. We just went to LA and New Orleans, and now we're going to Cleveland to a hospice for a week. Yes. And it was just like, oh man,
this is going to be a downer.
Every day we're like, all right guys, just mentally prepare yourselves. This next week's going to be kind of rough. There's probably going to be some tears. We're going to have to really just soldier through it. And the entire time, like, I was just so impressed by the care and everything that they did there.
Yeah,
just, I mean, really, if there's one episode that people need to see, I think it is that one.
Yeah, I think what you were saying about having to prepare ourselves, even I did, even though I'd lived through the experience. But, you know, I think a big part of that was Cleveland. So that's where I actually had to say, okay, I've got to psych myself up and get ready for this day.
I mean, you were going home, though. So.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I've been to Cleveland. I liked Cleveland.
I mean, you saw, yeah, I mean, there's nothing really against it now.
No,
but
I mean, it reminds me of Georgia in many ways.
It's flat Georgia.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we got a lot of hills. We actually do have a lot of hills right outside the metro area.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, they're nice.
I think the hospice one was obviously an emotional roller coaster for me, because we met a few people who unfortunately aren't here anymore, which is going to be reality. You go interview people in hospice care, you better get that documentary out fast, because if you want them to see it, you got to release it quickly. And a few of them didn't make it to when we release this, but their families will see it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they're going to love that we helped preserve people's memories,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
and
their stories.
Yeah, and that's the important thing. They're stories, because the stories are how you can actually have a fulfilling end of life at home. Now, I don't know the specific circumstances of
I don't want to give away the name or the person and all that.
The people.
Yeah.
I don't know the specific circumstances surrounding that person's demise, but I do know that the patients that we interviewed were very positive and very upbeat, and that kind of gives you an idea of what a difference it can make to actually be treated at home, where you don't have to be in a facility.
The other thing is, I think the hospice one secretly affected me more than the upfront ones that would affect me. You know, like watching the funeral stuff or seeing the stories from Joseph Scott Morgan. You know, like that stuff is the obviously one. But like going there and seeing people in a sad place and seeing the reality and the eventuality of death in these people's lives, I think I came home really affected from the hospice. Like, my fiance just wanted to chit chat about things that, I'll be honest, seemed extremely fucking trivial after seeing all that. Like, I wanted to be like, that's what you want to talk about tonight? Like, you want to get upset about the TV shows and stuff? Like, I was like, we got to do something with our lives right now.
Yeah.
You know, like, it can be over any minute. And I was very, you know, in my head for a few days after we got back from that one. I realized that I was much more affected and emotionally out of whack after that trip, especially because the museums and everything are scary and sad, but they're still not human. You know, they're not human in their stories. You know, the documentation is there, the history, it's all documented, but seeing a person and then knowing they're not there anymore is the difference. You know, like there's a lot of human interaction and connection there that is just lost in the history books version that we saw in some of the other episodes. So
yeah, I have to admit, I was very concerned about you guys the whole trip, and I just wanted to the hospice, and I just wanted to make sure that you were okay. I knew it would affect all of us.
Oh yeah,
and it did, but
absolutely.
You know, I know you're resilient. So
I think it just took a week or two to get out of the funk and get back into the rhythm of our lives, which we have established here in Georgia. So we were lucky to, you know, be busy with our production company and other things going on. So we just stayed focused, kept our nose down, and got out of that funk. But I'm just saying, like, there was a noticeable moment there for me after coming back, and having to grab the people in my life and say, hey, I'm not going to be normal right now, and you need to be okay with that and let me get back to normal. And a lot of people, it took a second for them to understand that. But yeah, that was one of my probably favorite episodes that we've seen, that I've seen completed so far. There's a few more we're still working on. The last two are still definitely in the post-production schedule, but will be out this year. But episode 3, Angels Among Us Hospice, is going to be a really, really good one. So I highly recommend you guys check that one out. Let's move on to episode 4. Wait, did we? Have we talked about episode 4 yet?
No, we haven't.
Here we are.
We just,
Corey, why don't you intro that episode?
Episode 4, Through a Mirror Darkly, non-mainstream religion. We actually just got done looking at this episode recently, and this is a really interesting episode, I think, for different cultures and for people who practice different religions, because we get to see how they view death, and we get to go as far as looking at voodoo culture, looking at Tibetan monks. We even got to learn about a religion that I had no knowledge of, known as Santa Muerte. And just this one, I think, I'm not really sure how to put this one yet. What I really love about this episode was just getting to see how each and every single culture views death and how they actually deal with it at the end of the day. Because they're all so different. And some of them, while on the surface, might seem kind of scary or strange, like voodoo, just because of the actual nature of it. My biggest takeaway from learning about it is that it's not that at all. If anything, voodoo culture is one of the most peaceful religions that I've ever seen. Voodoo
culture got so messed up. I know you know so much more about this, but I think our perspectives are important too, because we didn't know much about voodoo starting this project. Voodoo, to me, what do you think about voodoo dolls? A weird lady that's in front of a fire throwing chicken bones down, saying things to gods that we don't understand anything about. You know, like that's what voodoo is in my head before we started this project. But really, it's a very straightforward religion. It's not a crazy religion. It just has a flair to it.
Oh,
A visual flair that I think throws people off.
Yeah.
One of the coolest stories, which I cannot exactly say if this is historical fact, but I remember one of the people we talked to told us that voodoo dolls are not anything to do with hurting a person. They were medical record keepers. So what would happen is you'd go to the doctor and they'd say, hey, doctor, my knee hurts. So he would take a doll and write your name on it. And then he would put a needle in your knee. So next time you came back, you'd pull out your voodoo doll and say, oh, how's that knee doing? I see I took a record of that. Because some people didn't write and read back then.
Right.
So to do that, they would just take a doll, put a needle in the knee and say, okay, that's the area I treated last time. So next time he comes in, we'll pull out his doll and see, it's like essentially your visual medical records, like a old school x-ray or something, But then someone thought, as the old world became the new world, they must have twisted it around. And they're like, oh, that witch doctor over there is poking my knee, and that's why my knee hurts. No, your knee hurt before you came to him, man. You just, like you're connecting dots that aren't there. And so that's how the formation of voodoo dolls came out. And I just found most of the voodoo people we met were super cool. And that's one of the other big themes, is that all these people we met are not crazy people. They're just people that have chosen this way to live their life. Like everyone's trying to figure out their way to live life. And these people just chose a different path that most people don't go down, but they're not monsters or weirdos. They're just people that have chosen this one area of their life where they're going to do things this way. Right. And that doesn't make them any different than anyone else.
No. And on behalf of the voodoo community, I appreciate you speaking nicely about us, because that is part of the show, too, is my own involvement, that voodoo is my religion. So I'm not afraid to talk about it, and obviously if I'm putting it out on the documentary and that. But I'm glad that you guys felt that way, at least that you were able to see both through my example and hopefully the people we met, too, that, that this is really just a religion in and of itself. It's not the Hollywood hype that people think about.
Yeah, once I heard that voodoo doll story, I was like, oh, this is just people spinning voodoo into something bad. But also New Orleans, I'll be honest, hijacked voodoo for tourists.
Yes.
Tourism.
It sure did.
There's a voodoo shop on every main tourist street, You can get...
I mean, what the tiki culture is to Polynesian culture,
yeah,
the voodoo culture is what it is for New Orleans.
Yeah,
it's just a big poster.
Yeah, it's a big poster, a gift shop, if you will, of crap to buy that actually a lot of it probably doesn't have any legitimate voodoo meaning.
Yeah.
And I found the voodoo people to be just easily explain what they do and show you what they do. And yes, there is some visual flair to it, like the shrines and things like that. But there's no sacrificing things or killing goats or bleeding out. Oh, there is some of that.
But we don't necessarily do it that often. That's the big thing. It does happen, and not everybody does it. The one priestess we interviewed does not. She's
a vegan voodoo practitioner.
Right. So there are no blood sacrifices in her temple.
She does cut the throats of cucumbers, though, and bleed them out over her shrines. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. There may be.
Maybe she uses a juicer. That would be much more equivalent way to get the juices out.
That kind of. I mean, those things are so loud. It's like listening to the shuttle take off when you start a good high grade juicer. So,
oh god,
kind of ruin the atmosphere with the drums, the chants, and then.
Corey, what do you think of the voodoo people?
The magic bullet. That's all I'm thinking of. That's all I'm thinking of right now.
Set it and forget it.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, just all the voodoo culture in New Orleans and everything, I thought it was very striking and very fun. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for voodoo culture now, more so than I ever had before.
And also, you can see the connection. I mean, Catholicism goes way back, to the beginning of Christianity in some ways. And voodoo goes way back to when slaves came to the United States, because essentially they had to hide their religion inside Christianity to keep it going. And then it sort of morphed into its own thing.
Pretty much.
And so that's sort of a weird, not so long ago history of that religion, and easily traceable back. So when people are like, oh, that's some weird thing, I'd be like, honestly, your religion's way older and weirder. It doesn't have all the visual things.
Yeah.
Or the animal sacrifice sort of built into it, but it's not It's not easily looked at,
But it does
Right.
come with free crackers and wine.
Yes.
or donuts and coffee afterwards if you go
Right.
to that church.
That is true.
Voodoo does not have the donuts and coffee, unfortunately.
It does not, but I will say when there are animal sacrifices, the blood is only offered, and then the animal is actually cooked afterwards.
But
so,
the barbecue's
So nothing-
great.
nothing-
yeah, I was
goes
gonna
to
say,
waste.
Nothing goes to waste, and you can get some jambalaya, which I will put against a dry little wafer and some watered down wine any day.
Boom.
It's boom.
If that's not a sell for voodoo culture, I don't know what is. So
Food culture.
But
There we
let's go ahead and move on to episode 5. This is one that I'm really looking forward to seeing. It's called This Mortal Coil: Death in Culture. This is going to involve stuff that's like vampires. We're going back to the Obscura Museum. We're going to the Gathering of Nations, which was a amazingly powerful event when we were
One
in New
of
Mexico.
a life-changing event in
And
some
we did
ways.
actually talk about this briefly on a podcast months ago about just going to New Mexico for the first time and witnessing this just amazing gathering of all of these like different Native American tribes coming together and getting to see them all like on a floor together and dancing and singing and just showing off all the various aspects of their culture. Something about that moment really shocked me to my core. I was just like, this is amazing right here what we were witnessing. This, when people think America, red, white, and blue, a chick with giant freaking boobs shooting guns into the air.
Two
No,
Uzis.
the Gathering of Nations, that was America right there.
Yeah.
Encapsulated perfectly in that moment. And it was a great moment for me personally.
Yeah, you don't really understand Native American culture until you see it up close like that. And what opportunity do you have to see all those different tribes come together, showing off their old way of life, but at the same time, you would see them taking selfies.
Yeah.
And that is just the funniest juxtaposition to me. I know it's modern. I mean, these people aren't fucking living in the woods. They're
Right.
modern people that drive cars, have houses and all that stuff, but they pay homage to their roots. And they're obviously, if I don't know if they're full-blooded Indian, but they look mostly Indian, mostly Native American. And it was just cool being that close to the culture,
Right.
and being like in the vicinity of the whole thing. And it was like we were in a stadium and they were doing their dancing and their chanting and playing their traditional instruments and doing the traditional dances and in the traditional costumes, which looked expensive as hell.
Yeah.
And Corey and I have seen amazing cosplay up close.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to compare their costumes or their outfits to cosplay, but what I'm saying is we have a perspective on the dedication and commitment it takes to make a costume and an outfit, and these people have obviously put that in.
Right. And when you consider that so much of the work, you have to get up close to see the fine detailing. This isn't that you can just go down to Joann Fabrics or something and buy the cloth, although I'm sure you can get some of what they were wearing in their regalia there. But, you actually have to have the leather, and you have to know how to work the leather, and you have to be able to do the beadwork. It's very
they're
labor
tiny
intensive.
beads.
They
They're
are
not big
very
beads. They're
tiny.
Like they're using tweezers to put these things in place.
Yeah, pretty
and,
much.
And the feathers for their headdresses are expensive. They were
Yeah.
like, "You want to buy an eagle feather? It's $20 each." And I was like, "I'm not buying an eagle feather." But like, wow, that is expensive. Like,
Did they
you
really?
have-
Did
yeah.
someone really try to sell you an eagle feather?
Oh, I don't want to call it a gift shop, but what was it?
Well, the
vendors?
the
vendor-
marketplace.
yeah, you know how there's a dealer's room when you go to like an anime convention or something like that, or like any real convention. There's a
Yeah.
dealer's room. They kind of had a dealer's row of a traditional Native American food to instruments to memorabilia or whatever it would be, T-shirts.
Buy one eagle, get another one
Yeah.
free.
Buy one eagle feather,
Yeah,
get a turkey
well-
for free.
But you didn't.
No,
It's good that you didn't, because that's actually illegal.
I don't know if I saw real eagle feathers. I just saw maybe it was a parrot.
We saw
feather.
a
Oh,
real,
okay.
we did see a real eagle.
We did see a
did
real
see a
eagle.
real-
That was cool.
Which was awesome as well, going back to really encapsulating everything about America. When we were walking through that vendors and we were just filming and everything, I saw that eagle. Man, what a striking image that was.
Yeah.
And it was
That-
so cool.
It's a big ass bird.
yeah.
You don't
It is.
really understand how big an eagle is. Or you're like, okay, it's like a 3-foot tall bird. That's pretty big. But do you know what that feels like when you're next to a predator that big? It's
Exactly.
intense.
Yeah.
My favorite was, I think it was the Pyrenees falcon or the little gray falcon. What was that? I forget the name of that bird.
Peregrine.
Peregrine falcon.
Peregrine falcon.
Yeah.
I
To me,
think,
because
yeah.
they're just the sleekest and the cleanest looking bird.
Yeah.
And their lines are like a sports car. I find them to be like the coolest looking birds. And they're also a little more friendly because like eagles and shit really have no interest in people.
Right.
They don't want to be near you. You know, they're just used to it, so they're cool. But like some of the other smaller birds, I felt like had a little more interest in actually hanging out with the people
Yeah,
there. And things
they
like
seemed
that.
a little more social. Yeah,
Yeah.
that eagle just, I kept looking at it going, I think it wants to bite me.
I think it just doesn't want to be in this room.
It did, and it's like I'm quickly losing my patience. You know, it was odd because I thought, you know, that's kind of the look one of my cats gets on her face when she's pissed.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't want to be around this eagle if it goes too far, but it was beautiful to be up close to it.
Yes, it was a new respect for the giant predator our country is based off of.
And to think they originally wanted it to be a turkey.
Well, you know, turkeys are cool too. Though.
Yeah.
But aside from the Gatherings of the Nations, another big subject of this episode is going to be vampires and vampire culture. Another thing that I'm very much looking forward to as a big fan of horror film and horror novels and everything. You know, I love Dracula. I love all that stuff. I wanted to see what it was like to actually meet a real vampire. And we had the privilege of actually talking to a couple of them. And I'm not sure if I'm a true believer yet, but I'm still interested. There's still a part of me in the back of my mind that thinks, these guys are telling the truth.
Yeah.
Like, these guys are really vampires. These are the modern vampires that people have been talking about for years and years and years. It's just that culture's been diluted over time, and we're getting the real deal here. So this was a true interview with a vampire, if you
Oh
will.
man!
Yeah,
I knew you were going to throw that line in
You
there.
know,
We
this is a
have
powerful
to.
Nerdcast. Of course I am.
Well, you got to throw that line in there.
Well, you know, I mean, talking to someone who self-identifies and seriously says it, and, you know, part of the
And
premise...
does it.
And actually does drink human blood. And, you know, their explanation is that they lack something that the rest of us can get energy from food, but they actually need to go and get it from human blood.
Now, I don't want to dig in on the vampire people because
Well, you
I
don't
like
have
them as
to. It's
people.
okay.
That's the
Yeah.
thing. Everything is, you can, at the end of the day, not like these people for their choices or disagree with them or choose to believe what they believe is wrong. But these were fun people to hang out with, and
Yeah.
they were inviting, and they let us into their lives. And no, none of them had dark dungeons with, with caskets that they laid in. At least I don't think so. What I think is they're normal people that just have a weird hobby, or a weird way of dealing with the explanations of life and the day-to-day struggle of living. Like they just have their own way of looking at it. I don't really think drinking human blood would do anything for me. I think it would be a hell of a obstacle to put in your life to like make yourself have to be okay. It's a weird way to deal with it. And the other thing is, I feel like they have a few modern perspectives on it that I didn't even really think. Like the vampire we met says he only drinks blood from people that give it to him.
Right.
He does not attack people, and he doesn't drink it from animals because animals can't give consent. So I'm like, okay, you're like a cool, nice vampire.
Yeah,
you're
the
not
politically correct vampire.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like you ask consent. You're like the PC principal of fucking vampires over here.
Yeah.
And
PC bro?
you PC vampire, and he's a PC vamp. And he was just really nice, and he also took us to his voodoo store that he's the manager of.
Yeah.
And he made a, what was it called?
A gree-gree.
A gree-gree, which is a charm of some kind that you would wear that would bring you luck, right?
Yeah, his was, I think he was doing health that day.
Health?
But they're for anything, for luck, for love, for good relationships.
Yeah, and so there he was showing you a piece of the way he views the world, and you have to respect the guy because he was fun, he was nice, and he opened his home and lifestyle to us. And it was an enjoyable experience. And also getting to know the vampire expert that we met that teaches at Georgia Tech.
John Browning. He's an amazing guy. And that was really actually our first interview. And we talked for a long time. Of course, I put that on myself because once I get going on a subject, that's kind of how it goes. So apologies to you guys for having to sit you there for an hour and a half or so while I was gabbing with this guy.
It was good though.
Yeah,
It's what you hired us for.
It was good, but he was fascinating, and he's a really fun, personable guy too. You would think someone like that, okay, they're probably living in their parents' basement. Well, no, he has a very nice condo in Midtown Atlanta, and that's a nice area of town. He has some knickknacks on his bookshelves. He has a lot of vampire books in his bookshelves, which you would expect because he's an academic, but he has these cute little knickknacks, but he's not living in a dungeon. He's not going around dressing in black. And for that matter, neither did our self-identified vampire. He was,
I think he
as
showed
said,
up with like an Iron Maiden T-shirt on.
yeah,
and
something
he's
like that. It
"What's
was
up?"
that, and blue jeans, and he's like, I'm a jeans and T-shirt kind of guy. You know, that's
like the visual of the vampire was not the important part to a lot of the vampire people
Right.
we met.
Mm-hmm.
The lifestyle was,
Yeah.
and that was something that I think a lot of people would get lost on. They were like, "Where's the guy's cape? Where's
Yeah.
his fangs?"
Yeah,
Why-
that's
why
going
does-
into this. I'm expecting to see some fake prosthetic teeth, maybe some dark eyeshadow or something around those
like.
lines.
Why doesn't he look like he came out of Hot Topic?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
these
Well,
guys were
yeah.
just—they're just normal, run-of-the-mill guys you'd see on the street.
Mm-hmm.
Until they attack you at night.
Yeah, well, but that is going back to it. Everybody we interviewed really is just trying to live their lives. Everybody for all the episodes, just trying to live their lives. And, you know, just because they get into areas which a lot of society says is taboo or too weird to discuss, doesn't mean they're really any different than you and I.
That's true.
It's very true. Like unless they're taking it too far, you know, they're really just normal people
Yeah.
that found a way to deal with life, and that's the number one theme that I'm going to keep saying, because I was like, okay, we're going to run into a weirdo that likes to suck people's body junk out of them when they're doing bombings. Just
Yeah.
a normal guy. He's like, I
Yeah.
worked on a farm and I was good with dead animals, so I thought this was a good career for me too.
Yeah.
Or a middle-aged gentleman who said, I just wanted to change careers, and I think this would be a good second career for me, you
Yeah.
know? Or, like, I think we met a few, like, 20-year-old girls that they were just like, this is the career path I want to go down, and I'm studying in college to try to get this done before I'm 25, you know?
Yeah.
Like, normal people just choosing a career and a path, you know? So, I think it, in some way, demystified the world for me, going through After Hours, but in the same way, sort of said, look, the visuals that the media shoves at you is not where it ends and begins. It's all in the people's heads and how they view the world.
Right.
You know, like, these are just normal people that have a different perspective. They're not putting on a fucking Halloween show every time you see them in real life.
Right.
You know, so do you want to take us through episode 6?
Sure.
Yeah.
Episode 6, An Untimely Frost, is about suicide. And that's the sole topic of that episode. It was something that is very, very, again, taboo. People do not like to talk about it. People have a lot of preconceptions about why people attempt suicide. And
Mental illness in general is
Yeah.
something no one really talks about.
right. And it's something a lot like death in many ways. It just because suicide is related to death. But you're right, mental illness is the same way. People don't want to talk about it because it scares them. Or they have preconceptions and they don't want necessarily those preconceptions to be challenged because they're comfortable with them. And they don't want to necessarily have to look at the world in a different way. But hopefully this episode will give some people some ideas on some new perspective on what it means to go through this, whether you're a person who survived a suicide attempt or whether you're a person who lost someone through suicide. We even learned a new language to use when describing this, and that was an eye-opener for me. And I'd been in journalism for 25 years and realized that for all those years I was inadvertently committing, kind of perpetuating stereotypes by saying people commit suicide. But when you look at it, people die by suicide. When you say commit, well, you commit a crime, you commit an atrocity. And so to use the term commit with suicide just subtly reinforces the negative stereotypes.
Yeah, and in some ways, I hope I'm not calling anyone out, but I also found them to be, rightly so, very sensitive about certain things. Like, we released a promo, and they were like, don't show someone's looking down holding their face.
Yeah,
you know? And I was like,
holding their head in their hands.
yeah, I was just like, they're like, that's bad imagery for suicide. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, I never thought about it like
Yeah.
that. But that's
And
what
I
I
didn't
think of when
either.
I think of a sad person in sorrow and things like that. But they're like, we don't like that image in the suicide
Yeah,
community. So we
it's
want
because it perpetuates again the stereotype that you would always obviously see or notice when someone has a mental illness or is suffering with suicidal thoughts, and you don't always know.
Yeah.
Sometimes the person is behaving what you think may be perfectly normally, and you may know this person very well and think there's nothing wrong, and yet they
well,
may
you've
still
seen
have
that
this.
time and time again where there's a happy person. The happiest person in the room is sometimes the saddest person. Robin Williams immediately comes to mind.
Yeah.
Like the person that's trying to make everyone laugh the most is the saddest. That's not the person sitting in the corner not talking to anyone, putting up the red flags.
Exactly.
So I understand they're very in tuned and sensitive group by how they want to be represented.
Right.
And we just met a ton of cool individuals that had really powerful stories, and you got to see it from all perspectives, from like the families to an outsider to the person themselves that's suffering, for people around them that are helping them, people that have art projects dedicated to suicide, sort of survivors. Like we just saw suicide from all perspectives. And as someone who does not suffer from, in my opinion, any mental illness, at least nothing that's been documented yet, I didn't really connect with this topic in the sense that like I saw myself and reflected into this topic, but I saw the human story, absolutely, and I think I'm lucky to not go down that rabbit hole in some ways. I can't even imagine being stuck in a loop thinking about that, but I saw what it does and what it's like for a lot of people. What did you think about that sort of topic?
Well, unfortunately, I have known people in my life who have taken their own lives before. Some people that were good friends with my brother, people that I considered like my very own family. So this is something that I have experienced. But like you, I don't think I'm going to be diagnosed with anything. I don't really have those type of thoughts. But it gave me a much better perspective on what it is that they were going through. It didn't answer all my questions, because ultimately it is still one of the greatest mysteries as to what goes on in the human mind during that type of thing. It's a very personal thing as well, and that's what I learned the most from this, especially with our visit with Desiree Stage.
Yeah, Desiree Stage.
When we got to see her art exhibit and everything. Just beautiful work. Fantastic photography. Some amazing paintings that were in that place. And you see that all this amazing, beautiful imagery and all this creativity, and you're like, how could someone who could do this would even think about killing themselves?
Right.
And it's just it's really shocking, to be perfectly honest. But
yeah.
it also made me have a much better understanding of it and the mindset that these people get into. And most importantly, what I loved about the takeaway from the segment, the suicide segment, is that there is a way out for people. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. And just like the hospice episode, this is an episode that I think is really going to help people cope with these type of emotions and the things that they're actually going through, and basically letting them know that they're not alone in this. People go through this every single day. Unfortunately, we live in a culture where this type of thing is just swept under the rug.
Yeah, or it's portrayed in ways that are more Hollywood hype than anything. 13 Reasons Why is a perfect example of that. The way they dealt with suicide, that caused a huge uproar in the media.
Can you explain that a little more? Because Corey and I don't think have seen that show. I know it's about a kid in high school who suffers from mental illness and considers or does suicide by the end of the show. I don't know. I'm not necessarily looking for a spoiler, but what I'm saying is, how is it portrayed in a good or bad way, and why did it upset or make people happy?
Well, here's the thing. I haven't seen the show either.
Okay.
So a lot of
for
a lot of what they were saying was basically that it perpetuated some of the stereotypes. My understanding is that it has to do with a young woman who commits suicide and then leaves behind messages about why she did it, and seems to be blaming people. But I may have this plot line totally screwed up, so don't go by that if you haven't seen the show.
What the one thing I heard a lot, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Morgan, but the one thing I heard a lot in the suicide thing is people don't want you to talk about suicide because they think it will expose people to it, so therefore there will be more suicide because people will understand that that's an option.
Right.
And that to me was mind-blowing. Like, I was like, what?
They almost treat it like it's some sort of disease that you can contract.
Like,
if I hear about that, I'm going to start having suicidal thoughts. I'm going to want to have to take my
To me, that's been disproven in every thing it's ever been. Like, violence in video games. If kids see violence in video games, they'll go do violent things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't think that methodology transfers over. And I felt like some of the suicide people were seriously thought that was the dumbest thing. And then some of them are like, no, maybe, like, not saying they were for it, but they don't want to, like, always talk about suicide either. And I was sort of, like, taken aback by, even internally within that group, I sort of got the vibe that that wasn't even decided upon.
Yeah, that there was some disagreement there.
Yeah.
And, I think it's important to note that anytime, this was actually at the Conference for American Association of Suicidology that they went to, but these are people from all different disciplines, so they're always going to have different perspectives. It's hard to say. I mean, if you don't discuss suicide, then it becomes more of a problem because you're sweeping it under the rug and you're not bringing it out into the open where you could potentially help people who are affected by this. On the other hand, you know, if you start talking about it, does it put the thought in someone's head? I don't think there's any consensus or any hard proof one way or the other whether it does. But it's how you talk about it. If you're going to talk about it, how you talk about it, that I think is what the overwhelming message I got from some of the participants was.
If someone wants to kill themselves, there's not really much you can do to stop them. I mean, they can just eventually just jump off something high.
Yes. It's
you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
What I'm trying to say is that these people, if they're in a sad spot, I don't think being exposed to the concept of suicide is the thing that's going to push them over the edge. I think their brain, their mind, their situation, their desperation will do that.
Right.
The explanation of suicide will not do that. Mental health is something that is just so unexplored, taboo, and just removed from day-to-day society here. Because, I mean, you can even go, I'm not trying to get too political here, but like mass shootings. Like, no one wants to say we have a mental health problem in this country. They want to keep saying we have a gun problem. And while we may have a gun problem or may not, I'll leave that up to you to decide. I'm not here to tell you either way. I think we also have a mental health problem that no one wants to talk about for some reason. And we saw that a lot with the suicide episode. And the cool thing is, and the true to life thing is, we don't have the answers after doing this documentary. We just have a bunch of perspectives and a bunch of thoughts that we've gathered and presented to the audience.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really important thing, is that, well, I mean, some people may say we take advocacies in certain things or take a position in some things. But I think we do a very good job of just letting the people we're interviewing present their stories and letting the viewer make up their mind. You know, what do I feel about this? You know, is this something I want to include in my life? Do I want to talk about these things or pursue these subjects further? And what do I think about this person they just interviewed? Is this person batshit crazy, or is this person legitimately got something going on?
Yeah, I think there's some of the people that people might think, I think, you know, 9 out of 10 people might think they're crazy by seeing them, but there's some that I think it might even change your mind by the end of it. Yeah. And, you know, at the same time, we're so close to it because we physically have met these human beings. We've had conversations before, during, and after the camera was on, you know, so we just know these people so well. So I'm very excited for the audience to actually take a good look at it. I was going to say stab, but since it's about death,
yes,
you don't want to say that. Good stab at it. And, but yeah, like, we have some powerful stuff here. And again, some of them are over 1 hour.
Yes.
6 episodes, all at least an hour. And let's talk about the release schedule. When and where and how do people see it?
Okay, well, it actually debuts this Thursday, October 19th, which is tomorrow.
The first episode.
The first episode, not all of them. And it can be viewed on www.afterhoursclub.tv. That is our website. And if you go there now, you'll see our trailer on the homepage, and you'll see, if you go to the video section, you'll see all the promos we've released. But beginning tomorrow, this will be released in the late afternoon. We're going to have the first episode up on the homepage. So they'll be released every Thursday from now until November 23rd.
Awesome. Well, Morgan, I have to say thank you for this wild ride, this mind-opening exploration of the human condition that we have gone on called the After Hours Club. And I think if anyone has the time to check out some of these episodes, and, you know, these aren't 5-minute episodes. This isn't YouTube content. This is real documentary work, guys. And I really hope you give it a good attempt to watch it, even though it may be kind of a taboo topic here and there. And if you're listening to this way after we've released this, all the episodes will be available online, so you can check them out and just go to the concepts that interest you then, you know?
Yeah.
If you don't want to see all of them, that's fine. Just jump in and go to the suicide one, or go to the non-mainstream religion one, or the Angels Among Us hospice episode, which is definitely one of the most upbeat episodes, you know? Or if you want to see sex and death, you know, go to that episode. So we just want to put it all out there, kind of the Netflix model. The whole season is out there. You can watch it whenever you want.
Absolutely. And it's good because the episodes are pretty self-contained.
Yes,
you don't have to watch them in order or watch one to understand the other.
No. And also the cool thing, Corey, I don't think we've said this, you and I are like in this documentary.
Yeah. That's another thing. And before we even jump into that, again, Morgan, thank you so much for allowing us to be a part of this project.
Thank you.
An absolute privilege. It's expanded my mind. It's given me a much better view and perspective on this culture of death. And as Christian said, we're actually in the documentary a little bit. You yourself are the host, the creator of the series, but you decided to allow us, the camera crew and everybody, to kind of occasionally jump in, do some interviews. So you guys will actually be able to see us in the documentary, and I will make sure for all of the people who follow this on our YouTube channel, there will be links in the description box to not only the first episode when it's released, but to all of the promos which have been created for the show. And we would absolutely love your feedback on all of this. And when I say feedback, I stress real feedback. I don't want you guys to say, Corey and Christian sent me here. I want you guys to legitimately tell us what you thought about this documentary, what your takeaway from it was, and what you really liked about it or didn't like. It really is going to be very important to us, and we will update this podcast as it goes on with all of the new material that is released. So if you are listening to this, again, it will be in the description box.
Yeah, guys, thank you so much, and thank you for even giving us this hour to explain our documentary to you. We really do appreciate it, and we look forward to everything you guys have to say about it.
Yeah, and may I just say one final thing is I'm very grateful for both you, Christian, and Corey, and for our editor, Jordan, for agreeing to do this. I could never have done this without you, and I couldn't have picked a finer group of people to do it with.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate that. Morgan, thank you for being on the show today. Christian, thank you for being on the show again. Guys, before we leave, just want to thank you again for listening to the Powerful Nerdcast. There's a number of great ways that you can actually support this show. One of the best ways is to use our Amazon link. It is rogueintel.amazon.com. And one of the best things about this link is you can go there, you can buy anything from books, TV, movies, and you're going to help support all of these great podcast shows on Rogue Intel, and you're not going to be spending any extra money, so make sure to do that. I highly recommend that if you were listening to us talk about Joseph Scott Morgan, check out his book, Blood Beneath My Feet, The Journey of a Southern Death Investigator. You can find it on Amazon, and like I said, you'll be supporting all of these great shows. You can download this program for free at iTunes, as well as at Blog Talk Radio, and of course, Rogue Intel, which also has a number of other great programming. So thank you guys very much for joining us. We will see you guys next time.